Hello, Brian Davis, Home Improvement Man. Today's tutorial we're going to replace a window. Now, there's a couple ways you can go about it. The easiest way is that when you order your replacement windows is that you measure to the end of the sash inside the frame and then buy or order and then pay for a replacement where you're simply going to take the sashes out and then slide the new window in without removing the frame. The downside to that approach is that the window gets a little bit smaller. Not dramatically smaller, but smaller. And in this situation, this room is small, it's on the darker side, and so I didn't want to do that. So when I measured for my replacement windows, I measured to remove the entire window frame as part of the replacement. So now that when it comes time to install it, I'm going to have to remove the entire frame. One other thing to address, and this is kind of a universal concept, is whether to save the materials or not. And there's a bit of a trade-off. Saving the materials and reusing them, you save a bit of money on that material, but you also end up spending a little bit more money on labor. Now, if it's your labor, it doesn't matter so much unless you really value your time. But you also don't have then the waste that you're getting just throwing out there. So if your one of your motivators in life is to minimize your impact without making a lot of trash, then saving it and spending a little more time to protect the material when you can. Also recognize that as you take that approach, you might damage it in the process and make it unusable. Now I'm going to take that approach here. And part of the reason I'm going to take that approach is because this is an occupied room, and so I want to minimize mess. And so being careful, trying to protect the material will help me to minimize that mess. If I was just interested, or if I was not going to save anything, I'd go at it with a sledgehammer and not worry about any of the mess that was created or what I destroyed in the process. So it does require a little more care, and that care has the added benefit of not creating so much mess in the space. So to start, we're going to remove the window trim. And as I said, I'm going to do so carefully with the hope that I can reuse the trim. First step is that the trim is usually caulked in place. And even if it isn't, where it's been painted, the paint will create a bit of a seal. And if you don't cut that paint seal, where it shifts or where it transitions from the wall to the trim, it'll often pull the paint away and create more of a mess. So anytime I'm working on trim that's near a painted wall, I always run a blade around that trim to make sure that there's no paint that's going to pull away as I pull the trim away. Now, before I start to pry this piece off, I want to take a moment to look for screws. Because this is an older house, someone's gone through and normally you wouldn't use screws in this situation, but older house, someone's gone through and done some repairs, and screws were part of those repairs. So grab a device to remove some screws. Now, as I remove the trim, being careful, trying not to damage it in the process. All right, trim is out. Next step is to remove, well, I guess I got a little more trim here. So two steps. One is to remove this little piece of quarter round that's helping to hold the window sashes in place, and then I'm going to remove the sashes. As I remove the sashes, again, I'm going to try and save them. One, I don't want broken glass around. Two, I know that the homeowner is considering using the windows in other places for more decorative purposes. So I'm going to give them some material to work with. as I go to remove the sashes, it's going to be a lot easier to navigate them out if I know that they're not painted in. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the windows, the sashes have some play. Because if they're not moving, I want to know it's not because they're painted stuck, but because they're actually mechanically stuck, that there's a piece that's in there. So it gives me more information. I'm not actually putting a pry bar into the window sash. There's another trim piece on the bottom that's not giving me access to the base of the sash, which is what I want. Now, of course, when you're working with something that has glass, you need to be very careful, not just with the force of the impact, but twisting and torquing that could put undue pressure on the glass, causing it to shatter. So always move with care. Now, this is it's a wooden frame with an aluminum channel that the sash sits in, and then there are springs that are inside that aluminum channel. The aluminum channel is bent around the window sash, and to remove it, all I need to do is to open up that aluminum channel, give me space to pull the window sash out. So I am working around the glass, but careful to really focus my attention onto the aluminum framing. And knock out a few nails where they're going to interfere. And remember as you go through this, there's a spring in there. And so it is spring loaded. If this thing pops out, that spring could go in all sorts of directions. It could pull the aluminum with it. So just be careful of how you move. One. Now as I remove the top pane, remembering there's also springs on this one as well. Yours may be a fixed pane, so you may not have that same issue. Two. At this point, if you've purchased a replacement window that'll fit inside of the window frame, this is where you would go and put the new window back into place. I'm not done yet. I'm going to remove this frame as well. Unrelated to my choice of removing the frame, I know that there's a significant amount of rot on the window sill that has to be replaced as well. You can see all this. So I don't know if this piece of brick molding will be reusable, although it does feel like it's fairly square on the bottom, so maybe it will be okay. We'll find out. So the first thing is to carefully remove the brick molding from the outside. Again, I'm going to use the knife to cut the paint around that brick molding, and then I can be a little rougher as I remove the window frame. When I went to go move the camera, I looked back from the outside and realized that there are screws, quite a few screws, holding this brick molding on place. And so all of that hammering would have been, it's not that it would have been futile, but it would have been a lot more work than I would have needed to remove everything. There's a lot of screws in here. I don't know that I can reuse this. I mean, it's just not going to be, you can fill it in, you can start to, patch up the holes so that you have a good seal, but I don't know. Also, I noticed as I was pulling out the screws that many of them are just spinning, so it's going into rotted wood behind, which is concerning. And some of the screws are painted, and the screw bit wasn't biting into the screw head, so some of the screws are still in place. Well, we got some damage that needs to be addressed. Bit of rot in there, not too bad, but what's really a problem is down here in this corner. We'll see. Alright, quick tutorial on when rot is bad. So first of all, we have some rot right here. And this is what we would typically call dry rot, meaning it's dry. And dry rot is only bad when you need to attach something to it. If you can get around the dry rot to good wood, then it's okay. Well, there's one other time dry rot is bad, and that is when it is structurally necessary. And so what we're looking at right here is a window, or a hole for a window, and this hole has lots of good wood in which to nail or screw something to. And the dry rot is a small area, and I can secure the window by missing that area. Dry rot can be an indication of water penetration. If that water penetration has been managed, then the dry rot is no longer an issue. It's not like mold. Mold can grow and expand. Dry rot by itself cannot, unless the water that caused that rot returns. So if you can address the cause of the dry rot, or the water penetration, then you are fine, as long as you don't need to attach to that particular spot, or that area is not structurally necessary. I'm going to build a sill. And as you can see from the house behind me, which is where the sill is going, it's a rustic, it's a farmhouse, and so my skills match the final outcome. It doesn't have to be a perfectly refined sill. If that's the case, you probably want to go and have one that's been manufactured someplace else. But given what we're doing here, what I'll be able to do is fine. And so I'm going to take you through the process. Step one, the basic shape. Little decorative angle. Not bad, considering that it was done with a circular saw. And the important part here is that I've got this overhang, and I hit it the angle there, and it's more or less straight. A little sanding, and that'll be perfect. Let's go see how it fits. Hi there. So, slides in like so. Yeah, it fits quite nicely. There's a little bit of a gap on either side, which makes it easy to fit in, but a little bit of caulk will clear that up. At the edge where our new sill meets the house, it's tight, but again, caulk to make sure water doesn't get behind it. And we got a good sill here. Pretty pleased with that. First time. Yay for me. So here we go, looking at it up close. You can see very reasonable gap, nice and tight there, which is the important part. Same thing on this side. And this is where we've got a little bit of the dry rot, but we can avoid that as we're screwing it in. And that dry rot is not structural and not really important to the stability of the window. So the window, well, sand it down first, nail it and screw it in place. slide the window in, and this project's done. So before I start screwing everything into place and getting ready to put the window in, I measured the window one more time, and then I measured the gap to make sure everything's going to fit, measured the hole, and it looks like I might be able to fit a 2x4 up here because I wasn't anticipating replacing the sill and the change in the proportions by replacing the sill. I have more space than I anticipated. And so I want to double check, I want to verify before I screw anything into place that I can actually fit a 2x4 up here. And I want to test it without actually putting a 2x4 up there. So the way I do that is I take a couple scraps of 2x4, happen to be 2 pieces, and I place them down on the bottom. And now I'm going to see if the window will fit on top of these 2x4s and then inside the hole. If it does, that means I can take a 2x4 and move it from here and place the 2x4 up here, and I'll know that it's going to fit. And so as you can see, it will fit, and nice, and it'll be snug. So I probably won't even need some shims top to bottom in order to put this window together, just a few on the sides. So just a lucky turn of events. The turned out replacing the sill will actually make it easier to put the window in. So, quick note before we start putting everything together. Drywall screws are meant for drywall. They are not intended for construction. If you've ever been driving in a screw and have the head snap off, that's a good indicator using a screw that is too weak for the job intended. I'm attaching attaching lumber to lumber. I don't want to be using drywall screws, I want to use construction screws. So make sure you're using the right material. All right, now we can start to put in the window. All right, so I know the top and bottom are snug. I know the sides are going to need shims, and so that's what I have here. Put it in the middle. I don't need to use a level to set the window, because more important than whether the window is flush, or more important than whether this level, is the fact that it's flush with the walls. This house may have settled over time, and I don't want the window level but out of alignment with the walls. So I'm going to set the window to the walls and then secure them with the screws that come with the window. Now, notice how well the window sits on that sill. Now, there'll be minor adjustments as I fully set the window, but I'm pretty pleased with that, considering it was my first time putting something like that together. That downslope on the sill is going to allow the water to run off, and it should ensure that this window stays dry for a long time. You know, the window is pretty snug as is. I got pretty lucky with the measurements, considering I couldn't see where the edge of the trim was. As you can see, small gaps, nothing excessive. Definitely needs to be shimmed, but reasonable. Kind of makes up for the mess on the other side of the house, the sill that's completely rotted out, and the stud underneath it. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but the most common place where we lose energy in our homes, heat, as well as cool in the summertime, is windows. Now we've gone through the trouble of putting in some nice windows, double pane, possibly gas filled, to try and manage our energy, increase energy efficiency. And part of that is making sure that there are no gaps around the windows. It's one that is often overlooked. We can see the fancy windows, we can't see the gaps. And so when you're doing this sort of work, make sure you take the time to fill those gaps. Two ways you do that. The first is with some spray foam. You can use some old fiberglass insulation or batting. It's not as effective because the bats work, they need space to work. You don't want to compress the fiberglass insulation or newspaper or whatever else the material is. So trying to fit it into a small area can be difficult to maintain your energy efficiency. So this is a lot more effective. It expands quickly, so be mindful that it can create a mess. Be prepared for that. Lastly, make sure that you shake it well and that you apply it upside down. Yeah, that's simple. Now these applicator nozzles fill up with foam quickly, so make sure if you're doing multiple windows that you have all the windows ready to go before you start applying the spray foam. Before we return the trim to the windows, there's one more step we need to take, and that is the new window is thinner than the old window, and so we need to build out the frame to become flush with the drywall. And so I'm using these 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch pieces in order to fill the gap. Because the drywall is a 1/2 inch thick, I can use the 1/2 inch side and just slide it in here, making sure that you measure both sides because it can change from one side to the other. Is the nature of old houses, and making sure that as you nail it in, that you have something to nail into. Now I'm using an air compressor and a nailer, but you don't have to. All you need really is a hammer and some brads, and you'll be able to achieve the same effect. Now, it's helpful to do this step soon after you put in the spray foam, because the foam is still soft and you can move it around a little bit. The longer the foam sits, the harder it gets and the more difficult it is. I mean, you can cut it away, of course, but that gets messy and cumbersome. So trying to get to this step quickly is helpful. I'm going to do the same thing on the outside. Now, I had intended to reuse the trim on these windows, but sometimes the universe has other plans, and I can't do as I had intended. When you're replacing windows, you're changing the shape of the final window. And if that new window is larger than the old window, then it just isn't going to work. So when I put this trim here against the side, where it basically lined up, let's get it to line up. There we go. And what you'll see here is at the top, the old molding extends a little bit above the piece of 1/4 or 1/2 inch that I put in there, which is good. But down here, you'll see that it is well shy, that the new molding doesn't extend far enough down. It really should go to about the middle of the new 1/2 inch thick trim. If it didn't get there, if it at least got to the trim, it would work. It would be fine. But this I can't use, because if I ran this new piece across the bottom, you would see that it would be well above the 1/2 inch piece that I put in there. So I have to put in new trim. I mean, there's worse things in the world. Fairly minor, but I was hoping to save it. Oh well. Before I put the final pieces of trim on, I'm going to do a little bit of caulking. It's just easier to get to in certain spots while the final trim is not there. I don't need to caulk the new trim and the wall junction. That's going to be covered up, and I'll put in caulk around the outside, so that'll be fine. But I do want to caulk the new trim to the window junction. Also, it's really wise to have a rag around when you do this kind of work, because it can get messy occasionally if you're not, even if you are careful, it can get messy. So I don't need to apply a lot. Just enough to put a bead across the crack, cover the entire crack. That's really it. The more care you take during installation, the easier it is both to clean up at the end and also that your final product will look. Sometimes we take the mindset of I'll rush through the earlier stages and then I'll make it look pretty at the end. And it's really hard to fix sloppy construction in the beginning. So be patient, go through the steps, and you'll find that the end work is a lot easier. And this is one of those situations where I'm not entirely certain it was worth reusing the material. Normally I'm a big proponent of it, reuse it all, even if it takes a little more time, a little more labor. Why not? We live in a society where we tend to throw lots of things away just because we're mildly inconvenienced, so reuse it. But in this situation, I'm not sure. On the brick molding, I pulled out some pretty big nails, big nail heads, and so it's left a gaping hole. Of course I'm going to caulk the holes and fill them, but now there's more ways for the weather to penetrate behind the area, so it's anytime you can avoid that, you want to avoid getting rain or moisture or anything else back behind the material, your exterior cladding of any kind. So we're reusing it. I'm dubious of the benefit, but we're doing it anyway. When you go to cut the brick molding, remember that we cut the sill down. I cut it at a 15-degree angle. Remembering that because now I can cut the base of my brick molding at that same angle, so it is now going to sit flush with the base. All right, it's secure. It looks good. Final step out here is to caulk. Now, when you start caulking, the most important place to caulk is this top up here. That is where the rain hits first. Of course, everything's important. Outside is more important than inside. But that top surface, really take the time. Make sure you get up there. Make sure it's a good, clean caulk line. If you have any ripples, valleys, gaps in your caulk up there, it becomes a place where rain can settle, where your freeze-thaw cycle can start to interfere it. So you want to make sure it's smooth. At the same time, no one's going to see up there. So be thick, get heavy with it, but make sure you get a clean finish when you're done. All right, so two more things about this. One, I'm not going for pretty. I'm going for smooth, because if it's smooth, when the paint goes over it, then it'll look nice. If I try and make it pretty now, then I'm not going to get effective seals. Second, I did not seal the front edge of the brick molding. And the reason why is if you do, unfortunately, for whatever reason, do get water on the back end, someplace behind it, I want that water to have someplace to escape. So I don't want to back it up. I want to give it a way out. Again, the outside's the most important. Seal it up as best you can. I still need to get underneath here, but otherwise the outside of the window is all done. We'll finish up the trim on the inside in just a bit. We're back to finish up the job. This step I'm taking here, I really should have acknowledged that it was going to be necessary. Reusing the old trim would have only been possible if the new window was exactly the same size, or even slightly smaller, where I could trim the trim down to fit. This window is slightly larger, so I had to go out and buy the trim to go and replace it. So, process of measuring it. I've got the new shims, I guess you could call them, in place, and I'm going to set the trim back 1/8 of an inch, leaving about 1/8 inch exposed all the way around. So all I have to do is measure the inside of the trim, add 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch to each side, then add the thickness of the trim to get my outside dimensions of what this window is going to be. So, about 23 5/16. Make sure that this is square. Actually, down here we're at 23 3/8. I do want to square off the trim, so I'm going to use the larger of the two dimensions. 23 3/8. Adding 1/4 inch gives us 23 5/8. That's the inside of where I want the trim to line up. I'm using trim that I don't normally use, so I don't know the width off the top of my head. I'll go and measure that to make sure. But remembering 23 5/8. 37 3/4. I already forgot. 23 5/8, 37 3/4. This trim is 2.5 inches wide. I've got 2.5 inches on each side, which means a total of 5 inches in addition to the inside gap in the window and the 1/8 inch reveal on either side. So I need to add a total of 5 inches and 1/4 to the inside dimensions. I double checked my numbers inside, and I wrote it down this time so that I can make sure that I get the right numbers, because obviously I don't want to cut once and figure out that I measured incorrectly. Whenever I'm cutting something where a perfect fit is really important, is I always will square off the ends. Don't assume that the factory ends are square. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that my ends are square instead of the mitered cut. And the reason why is that I don't cut the angle until I've got the exact dimensions that I need. It's easier for me to find that that exact spot that I need to cut off of a square edge than it is in the middle of a piece of wood. So square it off first, then I can also walk the piece of wood into the blade to get it exactly at the spot that I'm looking for. I've got my wood cut for the interior trim, And there's a technique I discovered on the internet, and it really does illustrate the fact that the internet is an amazing place. There's a lot of trash and filth out there on the internet. Anybody can put anything on the internet, but you can find a lot of great resources. Um, and this method that I'm going to show you, I found on the internet, and I can't remember the name of the carpenter that posted it, but I'll put a link in the notes to share it. It's pretty effective. What's important though, before I get started, is that I make sure that my pair of wood that I have here is the same on each side, and that the warping is is a minimal. And so you can see I've got a little bit along the long edge, and that's manageable. I can push that together when I'm mounting it to the wall to make it go away. If the warping were, if it were to the side or it was twisted, I really can't manage that. So I'm working on a video to show you how to choose lumber, and I think that'll help to answer some of these questions if you don't know what I'm talking about. This one, on the longer pieces, again, double checking that they're the same, and a little bit worse. When I squeeze on this side, it sits a little bit high, but I can push it into place. So it's something that when I'm nailing this into the wall, I can manage. Most importantly is that it's even side to side. So I think you'll like this. What I've got here is essentially super glue, crazy glue. There's another name for it. I can't remember what it is. Those two names are brands, but there's other types of it. And this is the activator that helps it to really seal. I'm going to glue the corners together, and then I'm going to mount it to the wall, because when you mount it to the wall first and nail these in place, and then you go around, if these are slightly off, it looks horrible. So by getting a good seal, it ensures I've got a square frame, and the most visible part has been taken care of. And it's a really simple solution that ensures it looks good and actually makes it pretty easy to mount. So what you do is you spray one side with the activator, one side with the glue, you put it on a board, and then you just hold it together for 15 seconds. Now it's actually more useful, or it's better to use a sheet of drywall, because if the glue seeps out of the bottom, which it often does, it'll pull up a piece of paper that you can easily tear off and make it look clean again. Here, if it sticks to the plywood, it's a little bit harder to pull off. Not quite as clean when I'm done. A little bit of mess. But I've got a perfect 90, you can't see. I've got a perfect 90-degree angle that's going to hold together very well. And I just repeat the process. Now, if you're paying close attention, you'll see that notice that I'm pulling little bits of the plywood off with the board, and you can see that's why the drywall is better. Last thing is, I don't need to glue the last corner together. It's in place, and I have a little bit of play, so I can make the corrections when I put it on the wall. I love this method. You have to make sure that your saw is cutting, the right angles, but you'd have to do that anyway. It really does simplify the process, and it's even easier with the door where you only have 3 pieces. You don't have to worry about the 4th piece. Now this particular trim is a little bit harder to work with. It's a little thicker, a little heavier. Your standard door and window trim is really easy to bend and twist into position to make those minor adjustments at the very end. Yeah, I think you'll love it. Working in a being backlit is creating a lot of glare, and washing out the image, and I apologize for that. These are not one of the things that they covered in Carpentry University. So to finish up the installation here, I'm going to take this. No, I'm not done yet. I'd forgotten that I have these, it's not really a chair rail, it's higher, but the same basic idea, these boards of trim that go around the room, and the window size has changed. The window has actually gotten bigger, which is a good thing. And so that means that I need to trim these back a little bit in order to make my beautiful new framing fit around the window. Give me a moment. All right, the outside dimensions are 28 7/8. Of course, I knew that because I cut them just a few minutes ago. So I need to take away 5/8 of an inch. Now, when you're trying to divide a fraction in half, all you have to do, simple little trick here, take the bottom number and double it. So 5/8 in half is 2 times 5/16. So and actually, I'm going to pause before I do that. If I knew that the window was centered between the two pieces, I'd be good to go. But I'm not totally confident. If I recall, as I was installing this, I was putting more shims on one side than on the other. And it's more important that my framing is centered on the window than it be centered between my two pieces of pseudo chair rail. So that being said, yeah, there's a 1/4 inch difference one side to the other. So I need to take that into consideration. So what I'm going to do then is go side to side. So I know that I need 2.5 inches plus 1/8 of an inch to get my little reveal here back from each edge. 2 5/8 is what I need. So this side only needs a 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to wait and see if I actually need to cut that side. 2 5/8 means here I need 3/8 of an inch back. Now, as I'm cutting this, it's very possible there are going to be nails inside of it, so you want to make sure you grab a blade that is designed to be able to handle metal if it comes in contact with it. Alright, and then I also want to go around and make sure that I've removed all of the caulk to make sure there's nothing to push this trim off of the window. Let's see how it fits. Admire our handiwork. Yeah, that's going to work. So now I just need to clean the area so I'm not falling over my tools. Make sure I'm ready to go. And recognizing it's not going to be perfect. We got a 100-year-old house. Probably, the old windows were probably 40, 60 years old, and we're trying to fit brand new windows and framing into around everything else. So it'll be good, but it wouldn't look like 2021 construction. And frankly, if you're buying a 100-year-old farmhouse, you should be expecting 100-year-old construction. Now remember, there was one corner that wasn't glued together, and that's this corner. So this is the one that I really need to pay attention to. And then after that, it's just banging it all in. A little caulk, and we're done on the inside. All right, final step. The old windows had a little piece of trim that was right below the windowsill. Now this is one of those moments where you have a bit of a dilemma. No other window on this house has that piece of trim, but the two windows that I replaced do. For uniformity's sake, I would normally skip the trim, but I've got some damage down here, I got a hole down here, and covering it up or treating it in some other way is a lot more work than is really appropriate for this house, the condition and the state that it's in. So I'm going to put another piece of trim down here. 28 inches. I've got the old paint marks that begin right below the sill on the edges. Normally the base trim is set in a little bit. In this case, I don't have the space to do that. I do have enough room that I can angle it in on both edges, just a very shallow angle just to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go and do that. So yeah, let's cut this. So as I did before, first I cut it square, then I cut the angles. Now this piece of trim has one side that is rounded, one side that is square, so this edge is going to go up against the windowsill, and then the rounded edge will be at the bottom, so make sure that you're aware of that when you cut your angle. I think I'm going to cut a simple, 15 looks a little steep. I'm going to start off with, let's go half that. Let's do 7.5. See what that looks like. You know, it's not extreme, but I also don't want to draw a lot of attention to it given everything there. I think that's reasonable. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side and be done with it. Yeah, that's all right. So remembering that my number one goal here is not the decorative aspect, but to cover up the mess and to really protect from water penetrating. You know, I think that looks pretty nice. Simple, effective. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So that's basically it. I mean, obviously I need to paint it, and probably paint it black because that's how the other windows are in the area or around the house. I'm painting the trim black, but I feel like that improves the house. You got better windows. Now we've got some better ceiling around the windows. I think overall it's an improvement. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free, like it, share it, subscribe. Thank you.